Who, me? All right. We're going to go ahead and get started here. We're going to be in Mark chapters 7 and 8. We're going to be taking a look at Jesus and his disciples in Caesarea Philippi. And then hopefully we'll be able to move in the next chapter and talk about the Transfiguration. I've got stuff ready for both if we can get to it. So hopefully we're going to do that. In fact, that's right. Mark 8:27. I can put that for up next. We're going to be in Mark chapter 8, verse 27. That's where you start. All right, let's start with a quick word of prayer and then we'll jump right in. Our Heavenly Father, we thank you for another day of life and all the blessings that come with it. There's so many and there's too many for us to count. But we do want to thank you in particular for bringing us together safe and sound as a church family, that we may study together and grow closer together and grow closer to you as our knowledge and our faith grows. So we do pray that we'll open up the Word tonight and have our hearts and our minds open to the truths contained therein. Please watch over us as a church family. Be with everybody who serves this church in both very public and obvious ways, as well as those who serve behind the scenes. We thank you for everybody who has a servant's heart. We pray all this in your Son's name. Amen. All right, here we are in Mark chapter 8. And let's just go ahead and jump in here. Somebody please read for me 27 through 30. Let's just focus on 27 through 30 first. Thank you.
And Jesus went out and his disciples into the towns of Caesarea Philippi, and by the way he asked his disciples, saying unto them, Whom do men say that I am? And they answered, John the Baptist, but some say Elias, and others one of the prophets. And he said unto them, But who do ye say I am? And Peter answered and said unto him, Thou art the Christ. And he charged them that they should tell no man of him.
All right, so let's get our bearings here. So they've gone on a little field trip to Caesarea Philippi, which is not a particularly easy thing to get to for them. You have to go out of your way. It's about 25 miles north of the Sea of Galilee, and remember, they're traveling all of this on foot. So, when you're traveling 25 miles on foot, you really have to have some reason to go somewhere. Like, we're not talking about going to the corner grocery store or something like that here. This was a very purposeful thing that they did, and there was something very specific in Caesarea Philippi that Jesus is trying to show them, and a lesson that's supposed to be drawn from that. Caesarea Philippi at the time was kind of I don't think tourist trap is quite the right word for it, but it was a very touristy place. It was a place that people tended to travel to from long distances because of a very special feature that was there. It's at the base of Mount Hermon, and I've got some pictures I'll show you in just a sec of the site as it exists today. But it's sat at the base of Mount Hermon, which is massive. I mean, it's a huge mountain. Mount Hermon has snow on it almost all year long. It's a snow-capped mountain. It's a very, very massive mountain that you can see from a long way away up in what is today the northern border of Israel. One of the largest springs is there in Caesarea Philippi, and it feeds the Jordan River. The abundant water from the spring also makes for fertile land and very beautiful scenery. And it's because of that lush green scenery that the pagans from long, long ago viewed it as a very special place of worship and fertility. The city was previously known as Baal Hermon or Baal Gad, and then later Peneus, which is named after the Greek god of Pan, and that's where we get our word panic from. Okay, he was the Greek god of panic, basically. The modern name for the city is Benias. I don't know if that's exactly how you pronounce it, but it's kind of the Arabic transliteration of the word Peneus. So that's the modern day city. This spring in Caesarea Philippi emerges from a very, very large cave, the depth of which could not be determined at the time of Jesus. They would try to measure it, and they just could not get a sounding from how deep it was. It was so deep. And so they assumed, because of the depth of this cave and the fact that there's this water, gushing forth from it in the spring, they assumed that the cave was actually the entrance to the underworld, the place that's called Hades in the Greek world. So surrounding it, there was a grotto as well as alcoves that were cut into the walls. I'll show you some pictures of that. And they were used for shrines, for idols. There was also an open-air sanctuary that was dedicated to the Greek god Pan. Let me show you a few things here. So this is kind of a recreation of what the city of Caesarea Philippi probably might have looked like. And here you've got the cliff face right here and the grotto by the cave opening. And then there was also, I believe it was Herod, when Herod received this area as part of his realm from the Romans, from Caesar Augustus. Herod actually also built a marble temple in honor of Emperor Augustus. And it would have been somewhere in this side. I'm not sure exactly which building it was. I couldn't get any kind of fix on that because I don't believe that there's much as far as ruins are concerned for that. So that's what it might have looked like in its glorious heyday, very famous city. This is also a recreation of probably what those temples around the cave might have looked like as well. So you'd have the cave somewhere behind the building, and then the temple built up over it and around it. But interesting, this is what it looks like today, to give you some sense. But I'll go back and forth here so you can kind of imagine. That's what it probably looked like in the first century, in the time of Jesus, and that's what the site looks like today. To give you another few pictures here just to get some sense of it. So that's the cave where the spring bubbles forth, and it's a good-sized cave. I've obviously never been there myself. That's it from a little bit of a distance away from BiblePlaces.com, and you can see the water from the spring, flowing forth over these cascades. You can tell, beautiful scenery. So if you were a pagan and somewhere lush and beautiful like this, it's obvious why you might have viewed it as a place of special sanctuary.
When we were there, it was there was a cave.
Yeah.
A lot of bushes, a lot of shrubbery.
Yeah.
Kind of out of the way. It was not attractive to me.
It was not attractive. There's a lot of bushes and shrubs, huh? Yeah. Well, if you're from West Texas, then that's probably very lush, right? And, I will say this, most scientists who study climate in the Middle East today believe that it is much more arid in the Middle East now than it was 2,000 years ago. So, what you might have seen today in Caesarea Philippi, maybe it does look a little scrubby and dry, but probably 2,000 years ago it was probably more lush than it is now. So these are pictures of some of the alcoves that were cut into the rocks. So they would put statues and other kinds of shrines and stuff up there, and probably put candles and that sort of thing. So you just kind of close your eyes and imagine a little bit what the scene must have looked like with these temples and it's kind of hustle and bustle and animal sacrifices taking place and candles lit everywhere and people worshiping, if not Pan, then some of the other gods as well. Okay.
Oh. That's where Peter said, almost you persuade me to be a Christian. Is it Caesarea Philippi?
No, you're talking about Herod And that's in the book of Acts, and that's
Oh,
where,
very nice.
you got that. That's okay. You got that mixed up in Acts chapter 26, and that's King Agrippa, who Paul is talking to. In a short time, you'd persuade me to become a Christian.
Thou art Peter over this rock, I think.
Yes, and that is this story. We're going to get to that in just a second. So my next slide. Okay, so everybody's got the scenery, right? They've got the scenery. Imagine what it was like then for the 12 apostles. Like, you just walked 25 miles, okay? You got a lot of stuff to do. There's always plenty to do in the ministry. Always people clamoring to see Jesus, miracles to be done, sermons that need to be preached. And it's kind of out of the blue. Out of the blue, Jesus says, all right, we're going to go on another field trip. Like, oh, didn't we just get back from Tyre and Sidon? weren't we just at the Decapolis before that? No, we're going to go on another field trip. So pack your bags. We're going to go up to Caesarea Philippi. And again, it's 25 miles. Like, when you're hoofing at 25 miles, you've got to be doing that on purpose. It's not coincidence or accident that Jesus takes them to this place and then teaches them the lessons that he does. The scenery is important. You have a cliff face made of rock. You have a cave that was understood by the pagans to be the entrance, the gate of Hades. And here Jesus says, well, who do people say that I am? Almost like he takes them there and says, got a lot of options. Look around you. All these gods and people worshiping this and people worshiping that. You got a lot of options. Who do people say that I am? So what are some of the suggestions when the disciples answer the question, who do people say that I am? What are some ideas they throw out?
John the Baptist.
Yeah, maybe people think you might be John the Baptist raised from the dead. Okay, that's one option. Who else? Elijah, yeah. And if not Elijah, then maybe one of the other prophets raised from the dead. Why do you think, and this is pure speculation, maybe the answer is just a mystery, but why do you think it is that people just so easily mistook him for one of the prophets? Well, Elijah, or maybe one of the other prophets. Why was that kind of a stock answer that people had about Jesus?
They're looking for a human.
Okay, so they're looking for someone exceptional, not just a normal person. Rebecca?
They're used to people who are, connected with God and able to do miracles being prophets.
Yeah.
So it's kind of the normal answer.
Yeah. And when you read the stories of Elijah and Elisha in particular, it's amazing. Here, we can't go through it today. We just don't have time. I recommend, whenever you get around to it, please go reread Elijah and Elisha, because if John the Baptist is Elijah, right? He's prophesied to be Elijah. Well, what does that make Elisha? Who is Elisha foreshadowing? If Elijah foreshadows John the Baptist, then Elisha must be foreshadowing Christ. Yeah, Jesus. Did I just lose it? I have had so many problems with this Apple TV box in this room. I've only gotten it to work one other time. Irritating me. And when you go read the ministry of Elisha, a lot of Elisha's miracles actually mirror the miracles of Jesus as well. It's like pretty amazing. People being raised from the dead, and there are certain miracles that are like, whoa, that's kind of a Jesus miracle. So anyway, I don't want to get too sidetracked by that. But yeah, they're looking for someone exceptional. They're looking for someone unique, someone who's not quite human, right? Maybe more special than just your regular Joe human, okay? And he's also someone who stands against the leadership of the time, which is exactly what Elijah and Elisha did as well, or Jeremiah for that matter. They stood against the leadership of their time. They pushed against the flow of the stream and spoke against the kings and powers and principalities, as well as the priests in Jerusalem oftentimes got in the crosshairs of prophetic preaching as well.
Ryan, you said that they may not have been looking for someone that human, something else. So they, by it being the Son of God, that was totally a flip on the head for them, right? They were definitely not expecting God to send His Son.
At least in the form that He came.
Right.
Yeah. It's almost like, well, maybe you're John the Baptist, who clearly said he was not the Christ, and was kind of a weird, humble guy who wore funny clothes and ate bugs. Well, maybe they think you're Elijah, who also was a really humble guy who found himself dejected and depressed a lot. Or maybe you're Elisha, who was also kind of a weird guy. Elisha was a weird dude. Kind of stood out like a sore thumb everywhere he went. And so it's like, you can't be the Son of God, but I'll concede, maybe you're the second coming of John the Baptist, or Elijah, or Elisha, or Jeremiah. I'll concede that. But the idea of being the Son of God was still, even to the disciples, was probably, maybe wasn't their first answer. I mean, it's possible. I don't want to assume motive. It's possible that in answering this question, who do people say that I am? Maybe some of the disciples were looking around, going like, I kind of thought he was the second coming of Elijah also. Maybe the Son of God was not the first answer that all 12 of them came up with. And when Peter raises his hand and says, well, you're the Christ, the Son of the living God, it's possible that everybody else went, oh yeah, I totally missed the point of what Jesus was getting at here. Good answer, Peter. I never would have thought of that one. I don't want to say that's definitely what it was, but it is interesting that everybody started dancing around, and then Peter just comes out and says, you're the Christ, the Son of the living God, and Jesus latches onto that as if that is quite a revolutionary idea. Like maybe not all 12 of them have quite gotten to that point yet, and the fact that Peter verbalizes it is like, Peter, that's it. You're finally getting it. Someone is finally getting what I've been saying this whole time. And it's like an aha moment for them. Matthew's account elaborates a little bit more on this. So if you want to go to Matthew's account, go to Matthew chapter 16. And I know I'm trying really hard. I hope that you've noticed I'm trying really hard to avoid going to Matthew and Luke all the time when we're going through Mark, because this is a Mark class, and Mark reports on the events the way that he does by inspiration of the Holy Spirit. And if Mark wanted to say more, then the Spirit would have had him say more. So, but it's really hard when you're talking about this story not to get this other information. So Matthew's account includes the following, beginning in verse 16. And Simon Peter answered and said, thou art the Christ, the Son of the living God. And in verse 17 of Matthew 16, Jesus answered and said to him, blessed are you, Simon, son of John, because flesh and blood did not reveal this to you, but my Father who is in heaven. And I also say to you that you are Peter. And upon, what does the word Peter mean in Greek? It means rock, right? You are Peter, and upon this rock I will build my church, and the gates of Hades will not overpower it. I'll give you the keys of the kingdom of heaven. Whatever you shall bind on earth shall be bound in heaven. Whatever you shall loose on earth shall be loosed in heaven. So there's a little bit of elaboration here on this point. And the mention of his church being built upon a rock shows that Jesus' kingdom is unshakable, which I think is fascinating. Remember, they're there at Caesarea Philippi, and what's right behind Jesus as he's saying all of this? A big old rock, right? I mean, it's a big old cliff face. And there are temples made of rocks and alcoves cut into rocks for gods and goddesses of the pantheons of the Greeks and pagans. Everywhere they look is like there's this certainty, there's this, this strong foundation of all these great temples. And we could go back. I hate to go back in my slides because then it'll take forever to slide through them. But isn't it interesting that before and after picture I showed you, this is probably what it looked like then, with these glorious temples and buildings and a bustling grotto of worshipers there. And then this is what it looks like now. What's there now? Are there any temples left? No. And in Phil's words, it's just kind of an ugly place with scrub. And that's it. It's just kind of an ugly, scrubby place now. So when Jesus stands in front of idols' temples and Mount Hermon in the background and a cliff face and says, my church is built upon a rock. It's built upon the rock, and it cannot be shaken. Nothing can break it. Nothing can destroy it. Nothing can topple it down. we see 2,000 years later, all the stuff that's there at Caesarea Philippi is nothing but ruins. Hardly a stone on top of another stone. And yet here we are 2,000 years later, still representing Christ, still breathing His words, still preaching, still living by His will, 2,000 years later. So which kingdom truly stands? Which temple still stands? I think it's just amazing. And then the fact that He also says there in verse 18 of Matthew 16, nothing will overpower it, and the gates of Hades shall not overpower it. Isn't it cool that here they are, over there is a cave right there. See that cave back there? The Greeks think that that cave is literally the gate to Hades. And I'm telling you, Jesus tells His disciples, I'm telling you, even the gates of Hades, right there, can't overcome or overpower this church. And it's just like, whoa. I mean, I don't know. Does that make the hair on your arm stand up like it does to mine? Because I just think it's so cool that there was this whole reason. Couldn't Jesus have just said all this back in Capernaum? Sure. But would it have had quite the same impact in Capernaum that it does in Caesarea Philippi? So you think the field trip was worth all the time and the blisters on their feet?
Maybe after all the confusion with the bread, he needed a visual.
Yeah, that's what it is. He's just been like, bread, 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 bread. Do you get it yet? Ah, put your sandals back on. We're going back out. Oh, we just got home. No, you don't get it yet. But you don't get it yet. And Jesus, as a teacher of His disciples, is so persistent with His lessons and so insistent that His inner circle gets this. Now, I think built into this as well is the idea, we look at Matthew 16, and I think there's a lot of misconceptions about Peter, and, is Jesus elevating Peter to some kind of special status? He gives him a new name. I'm going to call you Peter from now on and not just Simon. Jesus, first of all, is not calling Peter the rock. I say to you that you are Peter, and upon this rock I will build my church. He's not referring to Peter being the rock. He's simply making a play on words. He's saying, your name is Peter, but what did you just do? What did Peter just say a couple verses earlier? What statement did he make that is of pivotal importance? What did he say? You are the Christ, the Son of the living God. And I think Jesus is saying, you're starting to get it. When you can build upon the foundation of Jesus Christ as the chief cornerstone, which ironically enough, go to 1 Peter 2. Don't really go there, we don't have time. But in 1 Peter 2, Peter actually talks about the chief cornerstone, right? This rock of offense. Peter himself is getting it. Oh, it's belief in Jesus as Christ, the Son of the living God. It's Jesus as the foundation stone. And upon this rock, upon the rock of belief in Jesus as the Son of God, I will build my church. That's what the rock is. It's not, Peter's not the rock. Peter himself is not, Jesus isn't calling Peter to become the first pope, okay? Contrary to Catholic misconception. That's not what Jesus is saying. He's saying that it's your belief in me as the Son of God that serves as the foundation stone of everything that my church is going to be. And when all these other buildings, all these other temples, when they all fall apart because of time and neglect, and these religions just become a footnote in an encyclopedia in 1,000 years, my church will still be here. Because it's not built with buildings and literal rocks. It's built right here in our hearts in belief in Him as the Son of God. And as long as somebody out there believes in Jesus as the Son of God, His church is still here. His church still stands. Does that make sense? All right, comments then. Would you like to elaborate on anything a little bit further that we have kind of covered so far?
I think when it says in the gates of hell or the gates of Hades, it don't make any difference what comes up against. Death's not going to prevent it from happening.
That's a good point, Phil. I actually really like that also. In pointing out Hades, and that even the gates of Hades won't overcome it, he's actually starting to sort of he's starting to lay, pardon the term, we've talked about laying the foundation a lot, but shifting on that a little bit. He's laying the foundation for the next important piece of his teaching, which is his death, burial, and resurrection. So yes, great job, Peter. You believe that I'm the Christ, the Son of the living God. But what I need to tell you next is going to hurt to hear. You're going to have a hard time accepting it, because once you believe that I'm the Son of God, and then I start to say that I'm going to be delivered up to the chief priests and the Pharisees, that they're going to torment me and then put me on a cross and bury me, I'm going to be raised up 3 days later. You just confessed that I'm the Son of God. But I got some bad news for you, which is actually really good news, but you're going to think it's bad news, that I'm going to die. So the fact that, like Phil points out, the fact that he's here at the gates of Hades saying, even this, even death and the grave, even death is not going to overpower what I'm building here. Because that's the very next thing that he starts to talk about in verse 31. So going a little bit further here in Mark 8, verse 31, he began to teach them that the Son of Man must suffer many things and be rejected by the elders and the chief priests and the scribes and be killed, and after 3 days rise again. And he was stating the matter plainly. So no more parables for them. You know, you've grown up enough. Essentially, I think it's like, once you confess that Jesus is Christ, the Son of the living God, that's the indication that at least Peter, if not all of them, that you're finally ready for me to tell you the hard part of the story. As if accepting Jesus as the Son of God was not the hardest part of the story. The hard part is the death. That's the really hard part. So it's like, no more parables, no more cagey language, no more tiptoeing around it. He's stating the matter plainly. We're going to Jerusalem, and I'm going to be delivered up, and they're going to kill me, but I am going to be raised up 3 days later. Now, we take it for granted in hindsight. Does that seem like an easy thing to accept for us in hindsight? Like, we look at it and go, why aren't you guys getting it yet? I think I have this tendency, and I admit it, over the years. I think I've had a tendency, especially early on in my preaching when I knew everything, right? When you're young and you know everything. I would kind of like criticize the apostles, like, man, they're so dumb. You're so dumb. Why did you get this? Well, at the moment, when hindsight doesn't give you 20/20, at the moment, does this actually feel like a complete undermining of what he just said? Wait, you just said you're the Son of God. We confessed it. You're the Son of God. So why did you go and undermine all of that by saying that you're going to be delivered up? What kind of Son of God gets delivered up and killed? That sure doesn't sound like a Son of God to me. But he's stating the matter plainly. He's ready to move on to the truth about this.
We have a little bit of a problem with that today, even with the world. You die to the world in baptism.
Yeah.
We have a lot of trouble with that.
Yeah, and baptism gets a lot of misconceptions also. Like, what's the meaning and the symbolism of baptism? And when you do get baptized, you're saying you're dying to the world, like you're done and you're a new creature. Well, a new creature has to live a certain way, and that's challenging for people. Very challenging. What's Peter? How does Peter handle this when he talks about dying and being buried and raised up? What's Peter's response? Yes, he's not taking it very well. He basically says, no way. Peter took him aside and rebuked him, it says in verse 32. And to that, Jesus rebuked Peter. I like this, the same word there. He took him aside and began to rebuke him in verse 32, but turning around and seeing him, seeing his disciples, he rebuked Peter. It's interesting, isn't it? Peter tries to rebuke Jesus in private. He tries to pull him aside, probably out of deference and respect. Does Jesus pull Peter aside and say, oh, listen, Peter, you can't say it like that? No, he says it in front of him. When he sees all the other disciples, it says in verse 3, turning around and seeing his disciples, he rebuked Peter and said, get behind me, Satan. You're not setting your mind on God's interests, but man's. Is that overly harsh? Or maybe are there some misconceptions that we might have about what Jesus is saying there?
We would view that harshly if, we think of Jesus is calling Peter Satan, but it seems like it's more of the words of Peter, are things that would be as if Satan would say it.
Yeah, if you come and you speak the message of Satan, it might as well be Satan saying it, right? You might not literally, Peter's not literally Satan, and Jesus is not accusing him of being Satan. But when you speak the way that Satan speaks, you're his messenger. You make yourself an enemy. It's kind of like the Antichrist in 1 John chapter 2. Everybody's like, what's the Antichrist? Oh, the Antichrist is coming. You know what John says the Antichrist is in 1 John 2? He just says, anybody who does not accept Jesus as the Son of God is the Antichrist. That's it. That's verse 22 of 1 John chapter 2. Who is the liar but the one who denies that Jesus is the Christ? This is the Antichrist, the one who denies the Father and the Son. Like, that's it. The Antichrist is not some mythical being or whatever that's going to come and take over the world. Like, when you deny that Jesus is the Son of God, you are the Antichrist. At least in that moment, in that context. Well, in this moment here, Satan is an enemy and an adversary. He's described as an adversary later on by Peter in Peter's own epistle. So as an adversary, Peter or Jesus is saying, if you're not on board with my plan, then you're my adversary. If you're not with me, you're against me. If you're not my friend, then you have set yourself up as my enemy. And I'll talk to you as my enemy. If you're going to talk to me that way, then I'm going to be clear about where we stand then. Yeah, go ahead. Adrian. Oh. Yeah. Sorry. You were looking at me like, Adrian. Yes.
So, something that's really it's just like you said, kind of the hairs on my arm standing up moment. In all of this, how often do we not understand the power of words, the words that we use, and then how many times do we hear in slang or really just flat out misuse of the word, get behind me, Satan. Yeah. When people say that as like a tagline or a bumper sticker, it's none of that. When Jesus said this, he was dead serious. And do I think it was too harsh? No. Do I think it was extremely harsh? Yes, but it should have been. Yeah. And it deserved that level of rebuke. Yeah. But I don't think I would have understood the gravity of it. Peter, did he understand it? The disciples, do we even today? No, we probably don't take the time to understand how serious this was, that Peter was making this type of rebuke to Jesus. Yeah. When the reality was, this is life and death that we're dealing with, and not physical death. Yeah. But so I find it being a very, very staggering, harsh rebuke, but it was fitting. Yeah. For the circumstance.
When you think about it, is if Peter had gotten his way, there's no gospel, there's no salvation, there's no resurrection. The 1 Corinthians 15 seems to make it very clear that if Jesus is not raised, we don't get raised. I think it's pretty clear from Romans 6 and a dozen other passages that if Jesus doesn't die, we don't get forgiveness of sins. So it's like, if Peter got his way, then Satan wins. Satan's going like, he hears Peter say that and he's slow clapping like, yes, Peter, that is music to my ears. Just send Jesus home. Hey, I got an idea. Let's put a crown on his head and let's let everybody believe he's a worldly king. And good job, Peter. You're getting it. And I think there's a level of frustration that I think just jumps off the page. It's frustrating for Jesus to feel like it's 2 steps forward, 1 step back all the time with his disciples. It's like they start to get it, and he thinks that he can like nudge them forward with something the next challenge. But the moment he challenges them with something new, they slap his hand away and say, no, it can't be like that. And it's just frustrating for Jesus to see apparent progress, but then to have that progress retarded again by their stubbornness or their lack of vision or their inability to see the difference between spiritual things and fleshly things. So I think there is a real palpable frustration on the part of Jesus here, and that I think that warrants the kind of response that he gives to Peter. Now notice Peter doesn't stomp away. Well, that's offensive. He doesn't stomp away. And in the very next chapter, in chapter 9, does Jesus give him the cold shoulder for the rest of his ministry? No. He invites him to the Mount of Transfiguration. The very disciple he just rebuked and called Satan, not many days later, he takes him and says, I got something to show you, Peter. You're going to love this. So bear with me. We've got to hike up a mountain now. So it's like, clearly this did not ruin the relationship between Peter and Jesus. If anything, it clarified in their relationship what needed to be corrected and which ideas needed to be altered. Kristen?
I know you said you want to go back in Matthew, but just
it's okay, you can.
Okay. But he said that far be it from you, Lord, that this shall happen to you. And I think that sounds like a really kind thing. Lord, I don't want you to have to go through this. And I think, like today, there's a lot of that. Let's be really kind and let's be really sensitive, even though it might not be according to God. You know what I'm saying? Like we try to be too kind. I'm not sure if I'm saying this right, but Jesus still rebuked him. I mean, he was trying to say a nice thing, but God said, no, that's not what's happening. Yeah. And that's for us today too. Like we want to make it nice and we want to make it okay, but no, that's not what God said to do. And we've got to be careful that we're not just trying to be nice so we don't offend somebody, or we think we're helping them, but it's not what God said, and we're not helping them. We're doing the exact opposite.
Yeah, that's a very good point. God has been clear throughout the ages that my ways, in Isaiah, my ways are not your ways. My thoughts are not your thoughts. They're higher than your thoughts. So who are we to stop God in his tracks and say, I'm not sure that's a very good idea, God. Why don't we do it this way instead? Well, if that was up to us, our way would blow up in our faces and be just total disaster. So he summoned the multitude in verse 34. Back in Mark 8, verse 34, he summoned the multitude along with his disciples. So it's time not just for his disciples, but now a large crowd gathers. He's got some teaching to offer. I assume that this is still in Caesarea Philippi, by the way. I don't really see anything in Mark 8. I guess I didn't look in Matthew 16, but I don't see anything in Mark 8 where in Matthew 16:21, it says from that time Jesus began to show his disciples. It's possible that they've gone home back to Capernaum at this point. It's not really very clear from the text. But he summoned the multitude with his disciples and said to them in verse 34, if anyone wishes to come after me, let him deny himself, take up his cross, and follow me. For whoever wishes to save his life shall lose it. Whoever loses his life for my sake and the gospel shall save it. For what does it profit a man to gain the whole world and forfeit his soul? For what shall a man give in exchange for his soul? For whoever is ashamed of me and my words in this adulterous and sinful generation, the Son of Man will also be ashamed of him when he comes in the glory of his Father with the holy angels. So, a very striking concept that he's laying out here. First of all, hindsight is 2020, 2,000 years later, Western Christian perspective, we take it as not a shocking statement that you need to take up your cross and follow after Jesus. But I've always said, and I'm sure that I've said this in a sermon a time or two, so if I'm just repeating myself, sorry, what are you going to do? But this is akin to saying, if you want to be part of my church, then you've got to grab your electric chair and drag an electric chair behind you and follow after me. Or if you want to be part of my church, you're just going to go ahead and, just grab a kit full of chemicals that just, killer chemicals, and just, take up your chemicals and follow after me. It's like firing squad. That's what he's saying is, when he says take up your cross, we wear crosses on necklaces and put crosses on church buildings, and we got crosses. Probably half of you could pick up your Bible, and there's probably a cross, somewhere on the binding of your Bible. So for us, the cross is this symbol because it's been imbued with all this Christian symbolism now. To them, before the cross of Jesus, what did the cross mean? It was a torture device. So how do you think the audience took it when he said, hey, You want to follow after me? Then you got to grab your electric chair and drag an electric chair behind you. How would you take a message like that? I don't know. What are your thoughts?
Well, you know, the idea of the cross sounds like a message of defeat on its face.
Yeah.
That's kind of interesting. Maybe part of that mystery of the gospel, this concept of, you know, your Savior has to die.
Yeah.
Especially when the crowd wants a hero like David to be triumphant and to win all the time, and yet he's talking about the cross and death.
Yeah. What they probably expected to hear was everybody pick up your swords and your spears and your pitchforks, and let's get torches and let's go ahead and march on Caesarea and go kill, let's go kill Pontius Pilate. And while we're at it, let's go kill Herod too, because he's awful. Let's just kill Herod that's probably what they thought. Yeah, grab your torches and pitchforks, grab your swords, your clubs, your spears. They're probably looking at that prophecy back in the Old Testament of, well, they'll turn their swords into plowshares and they'll hammer out their spears into. They're probably like, let's reverse that. Fight. But instead he's like, pick up a cross. Pick up a cross and come follow after me. Like, what? A cross? It's such a foreign concept of the torture device, the implement of capital punishment from your pagan overlords, the Romans, is actually a symbol of victory. Now, he wraps it up by talking about victory when he says in verse 38, the Son of Man will also be ashamed of him when he comes in the glory of his Father with the holy angels. So, yeah, the sermon starts off with this imagery of torture and capital punishment, but it ends with, the conclusion is, well, the Son of Man's coming with glory. With the glory of the Father, with an army of angels. This thing is going to end victoriously, but you've got to trust me right now that at this moment, it's not going to look like victory. We've been with our kids watching the most recent season, I think it's season 4 of The Chosen, and it's kind of starting to get to Jerusalem. It's like you can tell. Every episode we're like, I wonder how this is going to end. You're starting to get a sense of, I don't know that this is going to be a happy ending here. But it's been interesting seeing the way that they've portrayed some of the disciples, including Judas. And they've got this vision of, we expect that at any moment Jesus is going to go ahead and overthrow the Romans, and that we're going to finally get our Hulk Hogan Messiah, who's going to, just rip the chains off of us and give us our country back. And by the way, I was reading Alfred Edersheim on the Life and Times of Jesus, and it was the same way. Like, history clearly shows that the expectation at the time was they're going to get some superhero Messiah who's going to come and overthrow everybody, and they're just waiting. And it's like, that isn't what is happening. And Jesus could not be any clearer. I mean, it says there, remember, in verse 32, he was stating the matter plainly. Like, he can't be any clearer. There is going to be suffering. There's going to be torture. There's going to be martyrdom. There is going to be grief. There's going to be a cross. There's going to be a burial, a death. And it's not going to look like victory at the time. But I promise you, follow me, trust me, give your life for me, and you will see the way the victory comes to fruition. All right, when we get together, we're going to talk about the Transfiguration. It needs its own lesson anyway. Realistically, there was no way you're going to talk about Caesarea Philippi and the Transfiguration in one lesson. So be prepared to have Mark chapter 9 ready to go for Sunday morning. Okay, we'll start in Mark chapter 9 and verse 1. Thank you, everybody.
We're doing Harmony of the Gospel. We just finished.
Oh, so it's all just fresh and boring now, right? It never gets boring.
No.
Yeah.
You said get ready for the.
That's good. No need to say.
You don't
Random
know.
question.
Random.
I mean, not random. Okay. So, listen, like, when you,
How you doing, big
I
boy?
take for granted,
Take
I
place?
always look at it.
You understand all that?
And I always look
Yeah.
at it. It's grand. But, another level, like, first thing that gets touched was Messiah.
Yeah.
Then they're like, oh, and he's Messiah, God's son. Like, was any Old Testament prophecy would have made them think that it was going to be God's son, even just in a royal earthly king?
My understanding is that that was not
Like, everyone.
generally accepted. Like the idea of it being the Son of God, like they believed in a Messiah.
Right.
They believed that that Messiah would probably come in the form of David.
Mm-hmm.
But I think the link between Son of God and
Right.
Messiah was not.
I mean, because there's subtle things when we go.
Yeah.
But I was like, okay,
Daniel 7,
was that
right?
ever something they thought,
Yeah.
like even going, oh yeah, well, it could be God's son, but he's going to rule us here on earth. And I was like, I never actually thought about